Relationships, what are they made of?
What is your idea of the perfect relationship?
And what does the Bible say to guide us into a healthy, long-lasting relationship with one another?
Tune in today as we're going to explore relationships, love, what the world says, and ultimately what the Bible says. Living in harmony with one another is living life in the Spirit.
Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited because we are about to embark on a new topic. As you know, we finished the whole book of Revelation, and if you did not get to see that, we encourage you to go back and watch it. We did kind of that little bridge of what would it be like if Jesus wrote the letters to the churches and to us today. Well, now we're going to have an opportunity to get into relationships.
That's right.
But you know what? In order to stay up to date on all of our content, we encourage you to please go to our website, like and subscribe, because the only time that we message you is if we have a new podcast we put up or a blog, which you're not going to get a lot of dings at all.
Nope.
You can also catch us on.
You can catch us on our YouTube channel and or our Rumble channel. We're also on all of the podcast feeds, or many of them, iHeartRadio, Spotify. We're also on many of the podcast feeds like iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google and Apple Podcasts, and many more. And all of our content and our merchandise can be found on our website at livelifeinthespirit.com. Relationships. That word is thrown around a lot in our world. For some, it brings a smile to their face, maybe a warmth to their heart. For others, probably more of a grimace and some pain.
Well, no matter how you feel about them, relationships or lack of relationships are central to the lives of most people from all walks of life.
It's true. No matter who you are, where you're from, relationships often define, consume, or at least influence so very much in our life.
What does God have to say about relationships? And perhaps more importantly, what does he say about being in a relationship with him or with others? Before we can dive into relationships really though, there's one verse that really stands out the most. You know, God never asks us to do anything that he hasn't already done. He created us. We are an essence of him. And in 1 John 4:19, it says, we love because he first loved us.
And that really is at the heart of any relationship. It's love.
So we're not going it on our own. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to do something different. It is something that God has put into motion since the very beginning. Did you know that the Bible mentions love over 700 times?
I didn't. That is a lot of times. It must be important.
Usually when it's a lot of times, God wants to get your attention. People have all kinds of ideas about love, but thankfully we have the perfect role model for love, God himself.
It's true. Jesus, God's Son, came to earth to show us God's love and to teach us how to love each other. So you said that people have all kinds of ideas about love. So where do we get those ideas from?
Well, it's from our upbringing. From the very beginning, when we are born, who is there to nurture us and tend to our needs? And depending on who that is how that love is shaped. If you are born with a loving mother who is there and a father or whatever to nurture you and to grow you into that person and to model what love, a healthy love looks like, that's kind of where a lot of our ideas of love stem from.
And really that's the model that was given to us on how that was supposed to be shown.
Unfortunately, we live in a broken world and broken homes and dysfunctional families. And now, more than ever, we have more kids born without that loving mother to nurture them. And so love then is relationships are completely skewed. And they take that into their own relationships. And then if they're children, that gets passed down and it just keeps snowballing.
It does. And it affects so many areas in life that we can't even imagine sometimes. But we have to be able to be in relationship with people in work and at home and in the community, and you have to be able to get along with the clerk at the grocery store. I mean, just so many different things. And if we can't approach any of those with some sense of love, then we're going to struggle.
Well, it starts with school. They always say everything that I learned from kindergarten. But that's really, we're talking now it's preschool because that's the big thing. But going from preschool into school itself, your interactions, your relationship with your classmates, the interaction with your teachers and with the bus driver, and, what does that look like?
Right.
Is it adding to that nurturing and caring for and building up and learning good, healthy relationships, or is it just solidifying maybe a bad perception of that relationship from the very beginning?
Absolutely. So we also said that God has been the model and shown us that perfect example. So let's look and see what the scripture has to say about it. So in Deuteronomy 7:9, it says, "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments."
I love that. 1,000 generations.
Makes it clear it's not just for a few people at that time.
Right, and this was written in Deuteronomy, and they had no clue. There was 1,000 generations. And David said in the Psalms, he said in Psalms 86:15, "But you, Lord, are compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness." So those are all the attributes. What does love look like? Well, if you love someone, you're going to be compassionate towards them. We just got through doing the whole series on the fruits of the Spirit.
We did.
In
Well,
church.
you did.
And it was cool to look at, to break those down and really dive into what each of those words were. And they were action words, which means it's not just the sitting back and receiving, it's the doing. And I love this because David says the same thing. He says, compassionate. You have to actually do something to be compassionate, even if it means refraining from not being compassionate. Being gracious, extending grace where maybe grace is not deserved at the time.
Right.
Slow to anger, that would be that refraining.
And that does take love sometimes. And to me goes along with the other fruit of the Spirit as far as self-control. And also maybe a little bit of patience.
Gentleness.
For sure.
That's what I loved about the word forbearance. The actual definition of that was refraining from having that patience. And for those of you out there, if you're married, if you have kids, you understand all of those because you've never known patience until you've gotten married or you have kids. It just takes it to a whole new level.
When you're sharing a home with someone.
And if you've been married for longer than a year, you learn grace. You learn compassion.
You learn to hold your tongue in those moments when you really had a good comeback.
You learn humility. You learn that this relationship now that's based on love encompasses all of these things. And there's always going to be times when you're going to fall short. But it's that whole giving. I always say, I tell my couples when I do counseling that it's not 50-50. It's 100 and 100. Because if you're only doing 50%, the minute one falls below par, you're already short. If you're both giving 100%, even when one dips a little, it's not that big of a deal.
Right. You've still got more than enough to cover. So then skipping ahead to the New Testament, in John 15:12 through 13, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends."
That's a pretty tall order, isn't it?
It is.
So if you think about relationships, so let's think about those that are in the military. Those who have signed up, and not only are they defending their country, but they have taken an oath that they will defend their fellow soldiers. They will literally lay down their life for one another. But God doesn't just say, I expect you to die for somebody else, because he says, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. As we said, we love because God first loved us. And we're going to look later in John as well of what that love looked like from God, but he has never asked us to do anything he has not already done. And so he's modeled this love from the very beginning, and that's the high benchmark.
It is a high benchmark.
And it's something to strive for.
Yeah, right. A perfection we can't achieve, for sure. But what that means, though, is that when we love someone, when we're in that relationship, that we have to be willing to sacrifice. And that's not always easy.
No, it's not, because as human nature, we're selfish.
We are.
We want to do what we want to do and look out for our own and obtain what we want.
Right.
And that's the difference between God and, as Christians, what he calls us to do. He calls us to be selfless. He calls us to be humble. He calls us to put others' needs before ours. But there is still, when he says that, there is still healthy boundaries within that. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, is because they take those words and they take it to the extreme.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of good balance in life and relationships and boundaries and those kinds of things. It has to be balance. Absolutely. So from the very beginning, we were created to be connected to God. If you think about the garden, think about Genesis, God walked with Adam and Eve, and he communed with them. They communicated. They were close, personal. There was a close personal relationship there. And that's how God created and designed us to be, and what we need.
Well, and if you even go back further than that, he had a relationship with the angels.
Absolutely.
Before he ever even created man. And he creates Adam, but because he loved Adam so much, he realized that he did not have that equal counterpart to complete.
Right.
And so when he made Eve. But yes, he demonstrated from the very beginning what that perfect communal relationship looks like. And I love the part, we focus on the whole, because they were naked and not ashamed, as being just the clothes. No, it was that there was no sin.
Right.
That's why they were not ashamed, because they didn't know sin.
Right.
There was no reason to be ashamed.
And it was just beautiful harmony.
Unfortunately, though, like everything that you probably know in your life, nothing stays perfect.
No.
Even in that perfect setting where there was no sin, where there was the opportunity for sin, because God always gave them a choice. He says, don't eat. If you do, this is what will happen. I mean, they had the choice to eat it or not to eat it. And they didn't right away. We don't know how long Adam and Eve spent in that garden. We don't know if they were there for all of a month. We don't know if they were there for years, 1,000 years. We have no clue.
I get the sense it took a while, though. Maybe not as long as I would like to think that it took. But to me, after Adam and Eve were created, I mean, the angels were also there. It was obviously because the serpent, or that fallen angel, if they didn't have a relationship, he would have had no influence. So to me, that was just all a part of it. And that would have taken time to build up a relationship.
So you have God's relationship that's based on perfection. And not a authoritarian, you're not going to do this, but because I love you and I want you to love me, I want you to choose me. That's really ultimately what it was about. Choose my ways. Choose why I say no, because you don't know what the ramifications of this choice or this decision will lead to, and I do. But then you have the opposite relationship that shows up.
Right. And we have the fallen angel who's there whispering in their ear, well, did God really say that you're going to die? You really won't die. That's not what's going to happen. And just sort of planting those seeds of doubt, because they had no reason to distrust God until that was planted. That idea was planted in their head. And then it was a manipulative relationship and a toxic one, because he had an ulterior motive.
And like you said earlier, though, it didn't just start with that.
No,
it started with a relationship with that fallen realm, talking to Adam and Eve, getting them comfortable. They had ulterior motives from the very beginning, but they strategically went about it so that way they could earn their trust. They could earn their love. Adam and Eve had no other way to base it off of than the model from God.
Right.
And so imagine what that must have been like when they realized that they had been duped. What really hurt the worst? Yes, that they had let God down, that they had disobeyed him, but the fact that their perfect little bubble that they had, that they allowed someone to come in, it's that there's distrust, there's dishonesty, there's, what is this? They didn't even know that concept. I can't even imagine what all those emotions had to have been going like. But we see that in our relationships today.
Oh, for sure.
Have you ever had somebody say something or do something to you that was so out of character, so out of ordinary, what you knew of them, that they had been grooming you? And I say that because that's the first place my mind went to. Predators. They groom someone. They make sure that they develop that relationship, and they give that false sense of hope, security, love, and take advantage of it.
This is a perfect relationship just like that one. And you have initially no reason to question.
But then when you somehow are violated within that relationship, when that trust and everything is broken, the amount of feelings that go with that leave you reeling.
And completely devastated. And not what God had intended.
And we say, I didn't see that coming. Well, obviously Adam and Eve, they wouldn't see it coming because they didn't have anything to base it on.
Yeah.
But what I like about this is we think of, they ate the apple and immediately kicked out. Again, we don't know how long, how much time transpired before God actually kicked them out of the garden. Because it said they were hiding, but then God comes walking back through the garden again. Now it could be, kids, you leave them alone for 5-10 minutes. If it's quiet, you got to get worried. But we don't know. We have no clue how much time transpired from when they ate of that fruit to when God comes. And he doesn't immediately come down and say, how dare you, I saw that, or I leave you alone for just 5 minutes or whatever. He just says, where are you? And they're hiding. And he asks them, he says, why are you hiding? And they said, well, we're ashamed because we're naked. And then he says, who told you that you are naked? How would you know this?
He gives them the opportunity to come out and say what they've done. You can't tell me he didn't know.
Of course he knew. And he gave them that time in between before he comes down.
Well, and I think, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, here in a minute, but then what happens next? When we talked about it for the first time, that just really struck me. The first sacrifice had to happen next. And when we talk about love as sacrifice, he models it from the very beginning, because in order for them to have clothes,
he had to kill an animal
from his perfect world. So just really, even from the very first moment that we fell, he provided, and he continues to hold up his end, no matter what we do.
Well, and the other reason, because of that perfect relationship model, he didn't want Adam and Eve to be separated from him. That's why they could not eat of the tree of life.
Right.
Because they would have forever been lost in that sinful state. And so that is why it hurt him probably more than it hurt them being cast out of the garden, because he was protecting them and then putting into motion.
So let's bring this to now. After the fall, we were physically separated from God, but we still have that need for connection with him. So how do we achieve that now?
That's a good question. However, it's not as hard as what you would think. Well, God might not be walking in the garden that we can see him. He is still with us daily, and that's why he sent his son Jesus Christ, to then be a reflection and a model of love. He was the one seeking out the lost. He was the one healing those that were lame and broken, and the ones that were shoved away and cast out of society. He brought them back into the fold. And so it is that model, and we know that Christ is with us. And so because of that model of his love, that is what we are supposed to reflect, emulate to others. But is that always easy? And there again, that's what a perfect relationship looks like, and we strive to do that. But there are too many people that have never had that opportunity to grow up inside a home or a framework of what a good, healthy, loving, nurturing relationship looks like.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we look at that and we look at everything that God did in that relationship. It requires work, it requires action. Love is a verb. It's something that we have to do. And to me, relationships are a living, breathing thing that we have to nurture and grow and invest time and attention and different things in, because if not, it's not going anywhere and it's going to die.
Well, and the problem with the English language is we have one word for love. And it can mean anywhere from a deep, deep love that you have for a spouse or a child all the way up to, I love pizza or spaghetti,
Yeah.
I mean, it's so broad.
It is.
Where in Greek, there's actually multiple words for love. And that's the problem. Man. Because when we think about relationships, what's the first thing that always goes to people's mind? It's a romantic relationship.
Oh, okay.
If you say the word,
Mm-hmm.
right, that's
Right.
where you go. You don't think of the relationship between a parent and a child. You don't think of a friendship relationship as much.
Right.
Our brains just kind of go there. But that relationship is so broad. And before you can have a healthy romantic relationship or a marriage relationship, you have to have had that foundation or those tools into practice from birth up.
Really, absolutely.
But that doesn't mean that one cannot change and one cannot learn and one cannot adapt. Even if you did not have the opportunity to grow up in that kind of a loving home.
Well, and this is something that I thought of earlier and then it left. When we look at God and his relationship with us and we look at the way he loves, he doesn't love the way the world today says we should. Because while his love is unconditional, it doesn't mean that he doesn't correct. It doesn't mean that he doesn't say, ooh, that's not what you should do. I mean, if you look, like when they fell in the garden, he responded out of love and he still treated them lovingly, but they still had to pay for the consequences of their choices. And I think that's so much where we go astray. It seems like in either one direction or the other, it's either all or nothing. If I love you, then I have to accept absolutely everything you say and do without question, or I don't love you. Or we take it to this like, everything you do is wrong and I'm going to judge you and that kind of thing. And it's not either of those things. It's this beautiful thing in the middle that says, I'm going to love you through the choices you make that I don't agree with. And I'm probably going to tell you in a loving way that that's not, I don't believe that's what you're called to do. And I'm going to pray for you. And but that is not the model this world has, for sure.
Oh, and as time keeps going, it keeps getting more skewed. The influence of media, the influence of movies, of culture, it has really, really warped. I'll just flat out say, sex is not love. It is an act that is done between two married, loving people that is an expression of that. But that's not, we have warped everything so much.
Absolutely. Well, and I look at even the parent-child relationship. I mean, that's really the perfect example that God has given us in that parent-child relationship. And, it had gone too far in the other direction where parents were overcorrecting and taking, okay, yes, if your child does something that puts them in danger, and we're not going to get into this, but a smack on the butt or whatever, okay. And when you take it to, get a switch and you can't sit for a week, yes, that's not the kind of love God shows us. But it's also not, well, you showed up today. And even though you have a terrible attitude, you haven't tried one earthly thing, I'm going to give you all of the wonderful, I'm going to give you cookies, and I'm going to give you... No, I still love you. And if you need space because you're having a tough day, like I have tough days too, but that doesn't excuse your behavior, and that doesn't mean that you can be rude and horrible and throw tantrums and there's this imbalance. And that is not the loving parent-child relationship that God has shown us.
But then we take that, and as we grow, we take that into our friendships. We take that into our then
work,
our romantic relationships. And so it is that all or none. It's not that give and take, that healthy balance. With kids, we just keep reiterating that, well, you showed up, so you get a participation ribbon. So then when they go then to college, they expect to just get a diploma because they paid their money, and then they expect to get a job, and then they just want paid because they showed up to work. They're not going to do any work. They just, I showed up, so I should get paid, and I should get paid more because I showed up 2 days or 3 days in a row. That whole mentality has changed, but then if you take that same mindset into a marital relationship,
well, I'm here.
Yeah, I showed up. I'm still here, so
I came home today,
I shouldn't have to contribute anything because I'm here. It just, everything spirals. So how do we do that then with God? How many people go to church and then you go, well, I showed up. I'm here.
I'm a Christian.
I did my part.
Right. I'm a Christian. I tithe. And, I help when they have a function. I bring a salad. I gave some extra when the kids needed to go on a trip or whatever. I pray on Sunday mornings, and I tell people that I do those things. But do you know God?
Where is that relationship? And that's what we looked at with the whole letters. It was the one to Ephesus. You've lost your first love. You've lost that relationship. You don't know God anymore than you know your mailman. And I would even say some people know their mailman more than they know God.
Yeah, between the letter to Ephesus, and, a combination of that, and then the one that's in name only. I wear the title, and I do the things outwardly that a Christian would do, to a certain extent. But where's your heart?
Well, I love the ones that, they even go to the hospital or whatever, and they'll ask them, what denomination are you? And they'll just say Christian. And it's like, okay, have you gone to church? Have you ever gone to church? Because I don't say, well, I'm not, somebody who's really plugged in, someone who is involved, they'll say, I'm not saying you have to be a denomination by any means, but they will say, well, I'm not any of these, or I'm non-denominational, or I'm, you can tell by how they live their life if they have a relationship with God, if He is speaking through the Spirit to them. And that's where I will even take this the next step. It's the Trinity. So you have God, and yes, you have Jesus, but you also have that Spirit. What kind of a relationship do you have with that Spirit, the Holy Spirit? People say, I have not heard God. You know what? The Spirit is speaking God's voice to you all the time. Are you paying attention? Are you listening?
I have a son who is really interested in trying to figure out how to hear God's voice. And he's always asking me, because we talk about it. I talk about the fact that when I pray that I listen, or that I'll hear the guidance of the Spirit. Well, how do you do that? How do you do that? And we talk all the time. I said, imagine, if you will, because, he's 16 and he can't hardly imagine this, but I said, imagine, if you will, a time when someone would call and there was no caller ID. So when you picked up the phone and said hello, you didn't know who was on the other end. And he's like, okay. And I said, if it was someone you'd only talked to a few times, when they first said hello, would you know their name? Would you know their voice? Would you be able to know who it was just by hearing their voice? And he's like, well, no, probably not. You have to spend time, and you have to talk, and you have to listen, and you have to develop that. And then you can start to hear that voice. But you can't do it if you've just, once a week, I say a quick hello.
Yeah.
you have to invest time into that. Oh, okay. You know, I mean, you got to come up with things to help them understand, but that's so true. It doesn't just happen overnight. You know, you don't just decide one day, well, I'm going to hear the Holy Spirit today. And I haven't prayed in 15 years, but you know, today is going to be the day. No, you invest that time and you spend and you talk to God, and you have to be quiet before him. That part's the hard part for me sometimes. It might be shocking, but I like to talk.
No.
I know. Who knew? But you have to invest that time and do those kinds of things in order to hear him.
Well, you know, and I think about, I did a message, and actually that was a really good one. You should go on my channel and look at it. It's called Here's Your Sign. Mm-hmm. But there's a clip, and I might be able to stick it in here too. One of my favorite movies is Bruce Almighty. And there's the clip in the beginning where he's praying to God, you know, he's asking God for a sign, and he hasn't talked to God at all, and so he has his girlfriend's prayer beads that he's like, well, I'll give it a try, you know, and he's like, God, give me a sign, and there's all these signs, this truck that comes in front of him with all these signs saying detour, caution, turn around, whatever.
Stop, don't go this way.
Yeah, and he does his own thing, and of course then he hits the telephone pole, and he's mad at God because God didn't answer him. And he's been asking for God all this time. He's got this beeper, and this beeper keeps going off, and it's God trying to call him, and he won't answer the beeper. And he says, God, where are you? And he throws the beads, and his beeper goes off. And he looks at him and he says, don't know you, and I wouldn't answer if I did.
Okay, God. You want me to talk to you? Then talk back. Tell me what's going on. What should I do? Give me a signal. I need your guidance, Lord. Please send me a sign. Oh, what's this joker doing now? Okay. All right. I'll try it your way. All right. Lord, I need a miracle. I'm desperate. I need your help, Lord. Please reach into my life. What the heck? Where are ya? I got ya! Fine! The gloves are off, pal! Come on, let me see a little wrath. Smite me, oh mighty smiter! You're the one who should be fired! The only one around here not doing his job is you! Answer me! Sorry, don't know you. Wouldn't call you if I did.
You know, it's like that is so poignant. It is just so hits you right in the core, because how many of us, if God was literally trying to get your attention, would even know him and would answer? Even if you did. Mm-hmm. That line to me, for being a secular movie, is one of the strongest lines.
It absolutely is, because it's just so human, you know, and we get so busy and we get so caught up. Or that's one of the things is, well, I'm praying and I'm asking for something the way that I want it. And then when you're not responding the way that I want it, I just think you're not responding at all.
Well, I think in a way I like that movie so much is because God meets him right where he was. I mean, he's using filthy language. He is far from a Christian. Oh my gosh, as far as you could be. But God meets him where he's at. Mm-hmm. And he builds that relationship. He takes that time and eventually through this whole process he comes to an understanding and a relationship with God like he never thought he could ever have. And I love it because at the end when he says, you know, what, pray. Mm-hmm. And he starts with the whole, you know, like,
I want world peace.
I want world peace, you know, feed the poor, do all this. And he goes, well, that's great if you're running for Miss America, but tell me what's on your heart. Mm-hmm. And he does. And he says, now that's a prayer. He's finally had that relationship. And the cool thing that happens after that is that then the relationship that he had for work and for his girlfriend and all that changes and it becomes a totally different. Mm-hmm. Now it's substantial.
Right.
It's not superficial. And now he wants to be in a relationship and a healthy relationship with everybody. And it's even because he's a television person. Mm-hmm. And as a newscaster. And you can see the difference. Now all of a sudden he is in relationship with his audience as well, even though he has never met them. Right. And I love that.
Well, and to me, I love that prayer also because it shows that he finally gets what love is. Because what he says is that I want her to be happy even if it's not with me. Mm-hmm. Because he loves her enough to know that if he isn't what can make her happy, he wants her to be happy no matter what that is.
He's willing to let her go. Mm-hmm. And how many, or who do you see, is actually talking about that? You know, we listened to a podcast, a couple guys, and they were talking about people being so worried about if the other person loves them, and if the other person loves them, then they're going to stay in this relationship, or they're going to do this. But the biggest question is, do you love them?
Right. And we somehow miss that. Like, don't worry so much about the other person. You have no control over that.
Because love is not attention.
No.
And that's what we are craving in this culture and this society. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it because we never got it from our parents. Mm-hmm. We were not born up and raised in that healthy environment where we got attention.
Well, and I think, you know, we'll talk about this as we go on because this is going to be a multi-part series. Yes. But the other piece of it is I think we have skewed what our friendships are meant to be also. And we've taken them to have to be pretty superficial and to not fill the needs that we have, that we're meant to have. You know what I mean? Like I laugh, my family is pretty touchy-feely. You know, we hug and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I remember growing up when I was needing to be calmed down, or if I was needing to go to sleep, or if I needed to be quiet in church, my mom would rub our arm. Like she always did that. And aside from the fact that it was calming, that feeling of like I feel loved when I have that experience, and it was from my mom, you know what I mean? So then we get older, and if that's how for my entire young childhood I was shown love, then all of a sudden that can't happen anymore? Like, no, because those were good, healthy kinds of things. You find people, you seek people out that can do that because that's healthy connection, and we'll get into all of that. But I mean, I think that's what even the people who grow up with that, then society has said it's got to be sex. That's the only way you can have that. And that's absolutely not the way we were designed.
So then that brings us to one thing that we wanted to just touch on, and we're going to go into this a lot deeper in the next episode, but is that triangle or that three-stranded cord. And I use this at every one of my weddings because it's the scripture that a cord of 3 strands cannot easily be broken. But what are those 3 strands? Well, it's you, your spouse, and God. It's the 3 intertwined. See, if you just have a loving marriage, even if it can be a good, healthy marriage, it's never going to be the fullest that it could possibly ever be. It's only going to be like down here on the scale of what could be if God is a part of that and intertwined. Because if you both literally are letting God be a part of that marriage, you can withstand anything.
Absolutely.
Not saying it's going to be all roses. I'm coming up on my 30th anniversary next week. Can say it's not all roses, but it is strong, and you love each other, and you are committed, and you're willing to grow with each other and accept some of their faults, but help. Each one of you want to get better. You want to get closer. You want to. Mm-hmm. You want to make it to be the best that it could be.
Absolutely. As close to perfection in an imperfect world as we can get.
Exactly.
And I love the idea of that, the concept of the fact that, like, if you, in a triangle, if God is here and you're here and you're here, if you are only trying to get closer to each other, you can't do that. If one of you is getting closer to God and not the other one, that one's not as easy. But if you're both getting closer to God, then you're both also getting closer to each other. And that's what makes it as best and stronger and closer and everything. So it works really well in that concept.
That's good. I like that.
You can use it.
Okay. So besides the marriage, if you would even just bring it right down to your own core, we've done it on the healing, and we actually did a whole series on this, but that three-stranded cord personally is emotional, physical, and spiritual. And all three are intertwined, but the spiritual is so important, because when you have that all together, if you were just all emotion, oh honey, you are a mess. Mm-hmm. And if you were just all physical, nothing good's going to come of that.
No.
And if you were, you can't just be all spiritual.
Not here on this earth. No.
Not a healthy spiritual.
Right.
If you are literally connected with God and you are all spiritual, those are the three though, really. They just all go together.
They do. And any relationship has those components in it. And you have to nurture all three. And that's part of a healthy relationship, is having all three of those things.
So if you can establish that with yourself first,
mm-hmm.
and get that connection with God, it's just going to make everything else so much easier.
Absolutely.
In 1 Peter 4:8, which goes right along with what we just said, he says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins.
Yeah, when we love someone, it allows us to overlook their imperfections, because we're all imperfect.
Or deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Or breathe through it. Or laugh with a friend over it.
So to kind of wrap this up a little bit,
mm-hmm.
we've talked about God has never asked us to do anything he hasn't already done. When it says that there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for another, well, God already did that.
That he did.
And that would be from John 3:16.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life.
And that is ultimately it. That is the whole thing with the relationship, wanting to be with someone. And God wants to be with us. He wants to be with us in eternity, in the new heaven and the new earth. And that's why he sent his son Jesus, because of that love, to be the ultimate sacrifice. So that way one day we can be reunited with him. And it will be that perfect relationship once again in harmony. We can't even imagine what that'll be. We think about the splendors of heaven and we think about all this other stuff. But I think what we've missed the most is what that perfect relationship, love with us and God and Christ, what that's going to look like, I feel like. I mean, that is something we can't even begin to imagine here.
We really can't. I mean, we're just so disconnected in this world, and we strive for that connection and we work for it and we do as much as we can, but it's a long ways away.
So we wanted to just kind of broach into this subject a little bit. We know that for a lot of people, relationships, love is a huge topic right now, and it's affecting their lives in a lot of different ways. And so we thought we were going to spend quite a bit of time on this, breaking down individual aspects of it with the different topics.
Well, and it's one of those things, we talk about Revelation, and some of the other topics that we've talked about are big, broad, world-altering topics. But the thing is, it starts with the individual, with the family, with our relationship with God. That's at the core of what is under attack, and it has impacted so many things. And that's where we have to start healing it and fixing it to make change and to see things to be better and to help people to find relationship with God and heal relationships with each other. That's where it has to start. And so, we've looked at this big broad thing, but then we want to bring it into the part that really matters to all of us and the things that are impacting us in the day-to-day.
Well, the one thing that the enemy wants to attack the most is the family unit. And why? Because it's relationship.
Mm-hmm.
If we can pull each other apart, just like separating the weak one from the herd, it's easier to pick people apart when they're not together as a solidified unit. And that's why it's so important to know what a healthy relationship is and to have that healthy relationship with a family. And if you didn't have it with your family, there's no time like the present to try starting to establish that with your own family or within your own friends, or helping them understand what that relationship looks like, because we need to turn it around. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the enemy is just going to keep picking everybody off and make it easier.
And I know so many people who did not have that in their family of origin, and maybe you feel like, oh well, I'll never get to have that, and maybe not with your family of origin. But I have seen too many people where, yes, God, we can't control where we came from, but God has put people in their lives to fill in that gap and to show them and to model that. And so just be on the lookout for the people God might be putting in your life to show you what that looks like, and to step in the gap and to fill that need that we have and to show us. So don't feel like because you didn't have it from your family of origin that you just can't. And pray about that. Ask for God to provide people to model that for you. And read your Bible. Look at the scriptures. He's got plenty of examples in there of how to start with him.
And I think the best way to leave this is from the scriptures. From 1 Corinthians 16:14. Do everything in love. Until next time.
Shalom.